So welcome, gang. And I think a couple new faces. When I don't have full names, it's not as easy. Stephanie, are you brand new to us?
Did you take my phone?
Oops, got to go
Yes,
off mute.
hello
Okay.
everyone. Yes, I'm
Hi.
brand new.
Welcome.
I just found you guys.
That's awesome. Welcome to the party.
Thank you. Thank you.
And Helen, we have a few Helens. I can't remember whether Helen V is also new.
Nope, Helen V's old.
Old, okay.
Still old. Getting older by the day.
And I think I recognize everybody else. But I will do the usual quick spiel at the beginning. This is not a John Cogswell class. This is a watch Rachel fumble her way as best she can through all of the projects in the John Cogswell book. He was a mentor of mine, and he's taught me an awful lot, both in person and through his writing. And because he retired this year and I wasn't able to take another class with him, this is sort of my way of trying to solidify the information that I learned in his classes and beyond. And really take a sort of a textbook approach to it. So some of the, certainly there's a lot of me talking about what I would do in certain circumstances, but there are certain things that we're doing that are different than I would do them in my own practice, because I'm trying to, as best I can, follow John's book. There's a couple things that physically I'm finding I'm not able to do, so I'm not speaking on behalf of John. This is my interpretation with a little added bonus flavoring from me having taken a lot of his classes. So, and please, if you haven't already, buy his book to support him, because it's an amazing book, frankly. If you're working off of the hardcover, we will occasionally refer to pages, and I don't think there's been more than one printing edition. I think there have been multiple printings of it, but I don't think they revised it in any way. So usually people have been able to find the page I'm talking about pretty obviously. And that's true in all the videos that are historically up on YouTube for all the prior sessions. Oops, I've got to spotlight myself. This is why I have a note page for myself, so I don't forget the important parts. There we go. We are recording. And basically we're going to do a little bit of an intro, then we'll do some working session, and at the very end I'll ask people to show and tell. That is one of my favorite parts, even though I am deeply disappointed that we don't have more people showing me their work. It doesn't have to be about the task we're on. It can be showing off anything, especially if you've been playing around with stone setting. So and if it wasn't obvious, feel free to unmute, or if you're too shy to go up on voice on video, then pop something into the chat. When I'm at the torch and so on, I can't always see it in the immediate, but I'll try to play catch up. I'm going to post, if my chat will behave, I'm going to post the usual list of things about me and my places you can find me, including several shows I'm doing, and the event that we were just discussing, which is my next and last workshop for the season, which is Bezels Less Ordinary. I'll go over a couple of the things we're going to do in that session in just a moment, in case it interests you. And then by joining this, it officially makes you a student of mine. So you can use the Rio for Schools code. If you don't already have one set up, it's well worth it because it moves you into the pro level for most of your purchases for up to 6 months. And then you have to just redo it. If you have more than one teacher, they ask that you put all the teachers' codes that you get into your account, because it helps them track how teachers are doing to get them business and what kinds of events and projects we're doing. Let's see, did that post it? I think that was the trick. I just needed to break it up into 2 parts. So that's the intro that everybody gets over and over again from me if you've been here a lot. Any questions, let me know. And let's see, other than that, today I want to show a couple things on the bench, and you'll have to forgive me, gang. I did massive reorg of my studio and clean up and moving tools around. So I'm going to be fumbling a little bit. But I wanted to talk about a few of the things that are coming up in that Bezels Less Ordinary class, most of which are based off of what we've been doing in John's chapter 3, but there's some variants that he doesn't talk about as well. So, oops, I'm not switching gears. Why is my camera not switching? you guys, are you guys seeing my bench pin or not? Ah, hang on. I've got the completely wrong camera connected. Bear with me. That's what I mean by everything moved around. And so now I have to figure out where all the settings are. Go to my other video settings. There we go. That's what I needed. Okay, so now you can still see my face. We're good. You can still see my bench pin. All right, so in the Bezels Less Ordinary class, we're going to talk about how to modify a traditional step bezel to make it look like it was made in many, many parts, and that it has much fancier activity going on than if it were just a straight up step bezel. So these all started life as a step or shoulder bezel. This is one of my favorites because I really love the little facets that get put into the silver. And it's just a very easy and clean way to add some detailing to your settings. A couple different variations in here. And we're also going to work on ways to use gallery wire to create settings for yourself that just really blings it up. That's a lot of fun. There's a lot of different artists that teach variations on that theme. And we'll do some combination prong and tab setting. If you don't want to use the torch, tab setting is a great technique to learn. So that's going to be one of our quick wins that we'll get. And then we'll talk about blending some of these for greater effect, depending on the stones you've got. So those are some of the kinds of things that we'll be talking about in that weekend workshop. And there are 2 spots left right now. I might open it up for a third if people pack it in. But that's the last of this year's workshops. I'm still working on my schedule for next year's. And there will definitely be at least one hollow forms class, probably another of the Bezels Less Ordinary. And I'm doing a wax working class in Portland, Oregon in February, if people are interested in that. Okay. Questions before I dive into where we were last time and where we're headed this time? Okay, I'm going to take silence as a no. So I was deeply unhappy with the quality of the one that we did last time because it had way too much solder. It had some warping. You'll see that because I did such a steep angle on the difference, I made too big of a difference between my upper and lower bearing. And so it ended up causing a kind of a curvature. Let me see if I can get this to show a little better or draw it for you. So because I did such a big difference between top and bottom here, this started to need to pull up, and it created, I don't know if you can see it here, but it created a little bit of an arch on the lower prong, a lower bearing. And I didn't like that look, and it wasn't consistent all the way around. It got kind of messy. And I also wasn't happy with how bloody much solder I had used everywhere. So I have done a revised version of it. It was also a little bigger than I liked. And this is something that we should talk about. It's especially hard on stones that are not well calibrated to get a good fit. But you'll see if you look straight down on this that there's a fair amount of the bearing showing. And really, I need it tucked just under the stone to give it the best support, because it won't be supported by the, get over to the camera, there we go. Not because it won't be supported on the base, but because there's too much gap in here between the prongs and the stone. So when I have to do foldovers on it, if my stone comes here and my prong is way out here, there's going to be gap here. And what we would see from the side is the stone, let's call it that, and my prong would end up having a little gap and a little air gap when I pushed it over. Right?
You're
And I don't want that gap.
a little out of, there you go. Perfect.
Let me redraw that one because I'm making a mess. So if this is my stone, and I've got my bearing sticking a little too far out on this part, it's keeping the prong from pushing right up against it. So no matter how I fold it, I can't clear this little air gap that I've made just above that excess bearing. So I wasn't happy with the thickness of this when I started. I mean, excuse me, the spacing of this. And so I redid it a little smaller. I did it in haste, so I'm still not thrilled with this one, but it's a much better fit, except I got to get the right corner because this is not a well calibrated stone. Of course, I erased the mark when I was cleaning it up. So this one has a cleaner fit, right? It's got you don't see the gapping that you do in the other one. So that was one of the things I fixed. The other thing I fixed was I made my lower bearing a little closer to the size of the upper bearing so that I don't have the warpage that I was getting that was curved. And the thing that I'm unhappy about is that I didn't slow down enough to get really nicely matching prong widths and clean that up as I should, because I was trying to throw together another sample. And I will once again do this over again for my final, for the display board that I really need to get cleaned up so I can show it off to you guys again. And what I did before joining us on this call today is that I got it rough cleaned, and I would actually do a full polish on this. And I started trimming it to do the chevron style of prong, which let me draw that one so you can see it big scale. Remember that John has given us multiple ways to do cornering. So if we've got a corner on something, we can either leave it all one level, and then we're going to do that saw down and file business, which leaves us looking like this with our stone tucked underneath, right? So that gives us a square connection of even thickness. I find that blocks more of the stone than I'm happy with. So the other version he gives us is this chevron style, where you've got it working back to a point and it's displaying more of the stone, but it still has the same durability of holding the stone into place. So what I've been doing is cutting in these angles. Okay, so when instead of starting with this as my base, I take away that amount, cutting down to a lower point in the middle of the fold. Oops, I'm out of camera again. So I've just taken off this portion of it. And it is a little tricky, especially on a curve like this, because this is not quite a corner, so it's not a perfect fit. You need to keep that rounding for it, but I've left one so that you can see what I did for steps to do that. So that I started with positioning my stone and making sure that I've got it gripped as firmly as I can so that it is resting as it will be resting when it's fully set down. I like the super fine Sharpies, and I'm going to just mark inside of the prongs where the stone meets the prongs, just from the get that while still showing you guys. And it's important that you keep this stone held in place, because otherwise, like in this, it's got a bit of a belly on it, so it wants to slip and slide. So I need to keep it nice and neat, make my mark, and then I'm going to transition that mark from the front to the back of the prong so that I can see where it comes over. And make my line. I do not want my chevron cut any lower than where this line is running across the back. And I'm going to put the same angle into the corners that I did on the others I've already cut. You could do this by filing. That's a lot to file away, and it's kind of hard to get a clean corner, a clean triangle cut when it's not a perfect square. If I were doing an absolute 90-degree angle, everything was where it needed to be, I might have an easier time of it. But because it's got this ever so slight curve in order to fit my cushion, I'm finding it tricky otherwise. And for this one, let me see if I can get this in a position that you guys can actually see me do it, because it's a little tricky to hold. So what I'm choosing to do is cut in from the side. And I'm not trying to keep my saw upright, because if I keep it upright, I'm likely to overshoot. So I'm actually tilting it away from my metal a little so that I'm doing more cutting towards the front than towards the back. And cutting till I'm just at that V intersection. I'm gonna flip over and try to do the other side. One side is always a little more tricky than the other to get a good position on. And then I'm going to clean it up by meeting in the middle now that I've got a little track to follow. And these are sharp and spiky right now. Dulled them out a little bit, but the points are pretty steep. And I thought about whether a ring clamp or something would help me hold this better, but it's such an awkward shape to grip that there's not a heck of a lot. This is one of the frustrating things for me. If you're having real trouble, I suppose you could put it in some jet set or something. But when in doubt, cut shy of your mark and clean it up with files, which I'm going to have to do a little tiny bit of on this. So I've just added that extra chevron, and the only reason I need to trim it out is that one side is a little taller than the other. So I'm going to take the tip down a smidge and then fix my angle to fit. And obviously, if you can go a little slower than I'm going during demo time, you'll probably have more precision than I'm getting. And I want to do a quick turn on the, I'm going to put it on some Tripoli or any other cutting compound will do, just to blunt this and all. And then I'm going to toss it in the tumbler while we work on our making a setting this session. So we're going to do the Marquis setting while this tumbles to clean up. But let me pop you guys over to the not often used polishing camera. And again, it's just Tripoli. And I won't be able to hear you if you ask me questions for just a moment. Gonna scrub this and toss it in the tumbler, and I will be back in about 30 seconds once I get that running. It's just in the other room. Talk amongst yourselves.
We're supposed to be talking. Hey, everyone. Everyone getting ready for shows?
I'm just teaching.
Oh, teaching? You're teaching?
Yeah, I just teach private students. I don't, there's nowhere around here to do like workshops and things, and sales are really bad right now. So
Okay.
I'm teaching. It's not my favorite, but
Mhm.
whatever.
Are you specific in a certain area that you teach?
And no, I mean, I can teach. I'm not, I don't teach like advanced stone setting or anything, but mostly hammers, forming and forging and that kind of thing is my specialty. But
Cool. Real cool.
All right.
Okay.
So that is in the tumbler. I'm just doing a steel shot tumble. Again, if I were putting this on a piece of work, I would be taking my time and really cleaning it up, making sure I have every bit of solder blob taken care of, get it all shiny and exactly precise on all my chevrons. For this exercise, we're getting the rough cut because I know I'm going to redo this setting. Any questions about creating that chevron, creating that angle, getting in the why I would do that structurally? Anything on that setting? Okay.
No.
So it's been a while since we have done the first basket setting. So I'm going to redo a couple of the steps that are good to remember because it's easy to forget them when you're in a hurry to finish something with our 16 gauge wire. And we are working chapter 4 between, let's see, the first of these steps is back on page way back, like 90. Page 94-ish, 93-ish. So yeah, 92 is where we start the basket settings, and we're about to do the annealing and drawing of the wire to get it, not drawing like draw plate, but pulling of the wire to get it nice and straight. So I'm just working with 16 gauge. You can go up from there if you want something more bulky. You can use square wire if you want something with a little funkier look to it. For this sake, we're going with the pretty standard setting that he's showing us in this book. I wouldn't go much smaller unless you're working really tiny, and if you have the patience to work very tiny on basket settings, more power to you. Just make sure I'm on everything. Oops, didn't turn that on. So I'm just doing a basic annealing. And given how important it is that we get our shapes right, when we're putting in an unusual curve with a point, as we will be on the Marquis, this annealing is pretty critical. If you aren't already buying dead soft, you should. Unless you're not touching it with heat, dead soft wire, everything becomes dead soft wire once you've soldered it. So you may as well start its life in a more usable form for you. But just manipulating it from the coil or whatever can add to the tightness of it. So it's always good to start us out with good soft wire. And normally if I were doing a bunch of wire at once, I would coil this tighter because you don't want to just do a stick of wire annealing. It gets a very uneven anneal. And with silver, it's get it to the dull red, not to the cherry red, and then wait a 10 count or so and quench it. With silver, the quenching is actually as important as the heating because it does the last 10 or 20% of the annealing that happens. Let's see, why is this camera going dark on me all the time? Is that better? Yes, that's better. Now it's super bright. I think I may have unplugged something. Bear with me while I set these settings so you guys aren't getting the full glare. Ooh, that's even more glare. Wrong direction. I don't know what's up with this camera today. So I got a new light bar. I splurged on the Fordham and it's overpowering my camera, I think. See if that helps. Yeah, I'll get in close for things. For this exercise, I'm going to just bring out my handy dandy little bench vise. You want something that is stable and attached well enough that you're not going to fall on your butt while you're doing the straightening. I have fallen on my butt in many a studio. I'm not proud. I will fully admit it. I have pulled wire and landed on my ass because we're gripping it pretty hard, and if it slips out, we're taking the weight against it, you know, it's our body weight against the wire basically. So I don't know if I have a camera that can show you the angle. So I basically, when I'm doing this, I'm putting 1 foot forward and 1 foot behind me. As if any of you do yoga, it's like a start to a warrior pose, because then if you do let go or if it falls out on you, then you're able to catch yourself instead of doing the fall on the ass thing. It took me way more times than I should have taken to learn that. I have very strong memories of a couple of my teaching studios with me on the ground. Downside of this little vise is that it's in awkward positions, no matter where I put it. Upside is it's not the big vise that I have to get out of the corner, so. I wouldn't recommend if you've got like a freestanding vise on a stump, there's not enough weight to counter you. You want this to something nice and stable. Know that you're going to lose the last little smidge of the material because you're going to be gripping it in the teeth. And then I'm using, oh, you're not going to see that when it's on that camera. I'm using draw tongs, which have the teeth in them to hold it. They're great when you're using it with the draw plate, but they're also good for this. And let me see if I can show you better from this camera. There we go. So I've got my vise in front of me, which isn't going to be on camera while all the rest of this is on camera. And I've annealed it and I'm pulling with myself supported. Oops, gotta grip it better than that. Pulling. And I like to do a couple of quick tugs to get any of the kinks out of it. But you can also do sort of a wobble back and forth and just pull until it straightens out. It's not going to be perfect, but it's a darn sight straighter than it was when we went in. If you're having a really challenging time with it, it probably means you aren't as annealed as you think. Or if there's a real kink in the material, sometimes what I'll do is I'll hold the metal on both sides and I'll pull it down my bench against the wood and pull it in the opposite direction. So if it's curved this way, I put that side down and I pull down against it to try and break the lump in it. But otherwise, it's nice and straight. Now we can work with this on our next setting, even though we're going to about to put an actual curve into it for what we do. Just starting with straighter wire is going to get us off the ground running. Gotta get my vise out of the way. Oh my goodness. No. All right, and now we are hopping ahead to the Marquis section, which we're going to do as a combination of prong, wire prong and sheet prong, because that's what we've got is the exciting adventure in this part of the book. So that is page 112. You'll see some of the images. I don't know if I'll do a double prong. I think I might do single wire and then the sheet on the corners. And I need to grab my stone. So this is not a terrible, I'm on the wrong camera again. This is not a terribly well cut stone for our purposes. It's got a little bit of inconsistency in the thickness around it, and it's just not it's not very well cut. It's got a slight bigger curve on one side than on the other, which is going to make this a little trickier. But it's what I have in a scale that you'll be able to actually see me working on it. So we're going to start with that. And interestingly, John has us behave a little differently with the Marquis for baskets than he did for the Marquis with sheet when we were making step bezels. In that one, he had us do kind of a crease and fold. So we were doing both sides at once. In this one, he actually wants us doing the sides as two pieces and then soldering them together. Best I can figure, it's to get the crispest point. This is one of those things that I tend to judge based on the stone's point. If it's a super sharp point, yes, I want to have the setting also have a parallel point. But if it's not, I prefer a folded curve point. It's just slightly softer and it follows the softness of the stone. But we're going to do it his way. The first big tool that I have moved someplace other than where I had it before is my steel tools. So let me see if I can find one that does the trick. So what we're looking for is any curved object that roughly has the same curvature as the piece. This is way too small for this one. Let's see if my burr life follows the curve. So the burr life, surprisingly, has a good curvature that follows roughly my stone's curvature. If ideally you want something ever so slightly smaller so that we have some spring back on it, but this will do. We can work with this. And so we're supposed to take the metal, the silver wire, the 16 gauge wire, and we're putting this curve into it. Now, because we've just annealed it, it's going to be pretty close. But what we want to do is compare it to the curvature of the stone. So what I've got is good curve for about 3/4 to a little bit more than that of the stone. It's at the ends that it takes a little bit steeper curve. So it's not a bad starting place. I think I want to tighten it down a little bit more. So I'm just going to manually tighten in the curve, give myself a little bit more to work with. Okay. And then he has us do a cut down the middle with excess somewhere in the middle, not a cut all the way first, but we're going to get the opposite sides by putting a little bit of a slice down one side. Is that what he wants us to do? Do not miter the opposite ends yet. This will be done later, right? So center each of the curves and then cut each of these halves in half. Make sure I'm doing what he is actually asking, maybe on the answers for. So one of the challenges in this section of the book is that John sort of jumbles together our pair setting and our Marquis setting directions. So I have to remind myself of what I discovered needed to be done differently between the two. So the Marquis description, as best I could figure, starts up at page 111 on the second paragraph of the right column, where he says, I think it's best to make bearings for Marquis shape wire settings individually. We're selecting the wire big enough to make both bearings plus an extra ½ inch or so, and cut it in half and bend each piece to match. So have I got enough for 2? I don't yet have enough for 2, so I'm going to need to make a little bit more than I did. And then we're going to want something that's about yay long plus a ½ inch. So what I'm doing is I'm getting double the length of the stone plus about a ½ inch and just trimming that piece off. That's one. And do the same thing again. A little bit longer on one than the other. Okay, and from here he wants us to mark the center point and do a cut. So mark the center of each of these 2 halves. So I'm going to assume a ballpark. If you want to get precise, you could get like I keep a soft measuring tape so that if I have a curve I want to follow, I can do something along these lines, but I find it tends to be easier to just eyeball it than to try and get the exactness of that. And for this exercise, we've left ourselves extra, but this puts us right about the 1.5 mark. So we'll start right there, a little bit shy of it. And one of the things that I personally need to get in a better habit of doing is making sure that I'm sawing instead of snipping in certain cases. I've told you guys on earlier sessions that my jam is to go the shortest, fastest way to something, but that's not always the right way. It will often mean sloppier work. So I'm going to try and channel my inner John here and just cut down the middle on this. Always have a hard time with small bits, keeping them in view for you while I'm doing this. Okay, and these we are mitering with a flat file, or my go-to, as I've told you in other sessions, is the barrette file. And we're mitering them to meet the angle in the middle that's going to create the point. We are not mitering the other end. We're just mitering what we've just now cut. If you hold it up against something that's roughly flattened, I mean, roughly flat edge, you can get your angle pretty well. There's one. There's the other side I sawed. There we go. There's the other. So I realized the other day that I always have a little sense of envy at how clean John's samples show up by the time they're finished during classes. And I had the eureka of realizing that I've only taken classes that have day-long sessions, not like this 2 and 3 hour kind of thing of his classes. And we would do a piece of a demo, and then we'd go off to emulate that. And meanwhile, he'd be sitting there furiously filing, well, furiously, but meticulously filing and sanding and finishing things. So it was like magic had happened between the steps. And that's one of the reasons that I don't encourage you to go as fast as we're going when you're doing this yourself. But in fact, consider these sort of rough models and take the time to sand when you need to sand and file when you need to file, and do each step as cleanly as you can. As a reminder, one of the eureka things that John taught me early on is that you don't sand until the last possible minute. You don't sand and file. If you will have access to something later on, don't do it now. You want to do it only after all of your other soldering and stuff has happened. So what I'm getting here is a bit of an angle, but it's a much wider angle than we'll end up with. However, there's going to be some amount of pushing in of the stone no matter what, but I think I want a little bit steeper filing on this. The little steps being right at the beginning definitely enhances the likelihood that you won't have more work later in the process. It's getting closer to what I want. A little bit more on the other side. And for those of you that haven't heard my early on spiel, I encourage you to take as many classes with as many different instructors as possible. I don't consider this a class. This is sort of a learning exercise, collective learning exercise, but either way, the more you can learn different techniques and incorporate small pieces of them into your own practice, the better. And your work will be an amalgam of what you've done from all of those. So this is about as far as I'm going to go on getting them arched together, because I know that I'm going to be crossing over the upper half when I get past this. So I'm going to do a solder join on this over at the torch. And as with other lessons from John during this series, he wants us using hard solder throughout, which I'm going to say, if you are having challenges with your soldering, you don't have to live and die by that, but the more you can practice and get to that as your regular behavior for this kind of setting, the happier you'll be. You'll have fewer times when you are soldering one side and melt out the other, you'll have a cleaner look because the solder will appear as it would if it were plain silver, whereas the lighter, you know, the medium solder and easy solder get progressively more coppery. Oops, it helps if I cut some solder. I put so much effort into cleaning up, I forgot to prep all the things that I usually just have sitting on my bench. I got to tell you guys, it felt so good to reorganize the studio. It wasn't fun in the doing. It was a total of about 16 hours of work, pulling things off of shelves and cleaning and sorting. But if you are in a rut creatively and you look around you and your studio is overwhelming, try doing some cleanup. It makes a huge difference.
I'm doing that now and I'm not enjoying the process.
Yeah, I had a deadline. I was expecting to do a lot of it when I came back from vacation, when I got hit with the COVID, but I was just too exhausted, and I had a deadline of some workers coming to look at something in the house, and they needed to be able to have access. So it sort of became all of an urgent, oops, I must not have my pressure as high as I thought I had it. Hang on a sec. Yeah. It was one of those activities that reminded me that the way to eat the elephant is a bite at a time. I'm always going to check, even when I get flow on one side, I'm going to flip it over and make sure that I actually got flow through to the other side. Sometimes you don't. A little more flow there, that'll make me happier. There we go. Okay, so there's 1/2 of one. And because it's now really well annealed, we'll be able to get it easily turned into the little fishy. Go back over to the other side. I'm going to have to do some white balancing on this camera for you guys because this is crazy. Let's see if I can. It's just, yeah, I'll have to play around with that between sessions. Sorry, guys. Okay, so now what I'm looking for is to get this curve so that it follows the support of the stone. Same thing I discussed on that cushion cut. I don't want this falling out over the stone. So if I'm looking at it from the top, I still see a little smidge there. I might need to take my half round pliers in this case and just do a little bit of encouraging that curve to be slightly less curvy if it's poking out at a curve, or maybe more curvy depending on how yours is fitting. And I'm just crossing over that extra 1/2 inch that he told us to make on each. Give ourselves a little room. So one of the things that I'm running up against with this stone is because it's got such a bad cut, it sort of wants to sit higher than I would like it to when it's done. And that may mean that I'm going to have to do a little tweaking of the shape. I may need to curve this a little bit so it's resting, or I may come in and do, we've talked in the past about filing a little bit inside the inner line of the bearing. And either of those would be actions that would help this particular stone's seat. Because I'm not liking how thick it is at the ends, but we'll see. I can do something about that along the way. So check it from both sides. It makes it easier sometimes to look at it from the back. And we're going to be sawing through both of these at this end so that we get the immediate cut at the angle that we want. And so for this, I tend to want to be holding it down with both fingers so that it's not moving, and cut in to both at the same time.
So Rachel,
Yep.
are you like literally sawing from the top, like in the middle there?
So I was sawing, so where they crossed over, I
Uh-huh.
started my sawing. Let me draw. My fingers are gonna make it look weird. So there's two ways to approach this. I think it was Alan Revere when he was on in our early sessions reminded me that I could always cut from the inside out. I have to keep that habit in mind and try and ingrain it in myself. But basically, we had the soldered end connected here, and then we crossed over
Mhm.
our two pieces. So this is where I am cutting right down this line. Once I know that it's going to end, because by sawing through the pair of them, if I can control it, if I can't, I cut them the normal way and I file them just like I did the other end. But if I can control that sawing at the position that I want, then I end up immediately with two already beveled to match, just like when we're cutting a ring band, a clean saw line to get the ring band to fit tightly together. Same principle applies here. Is this act of sawing gives us the line that matches the two parts nicely.
Mhm.
But again, I was sawing from this side. We could have put our saw blade in on the inside and sawed our way out, which gives you a little more precision on where you're hitting the seam. Because when I go this way, it sort of wants to push against itself. When I go that way, the worst thing that happens is it opens a little bit on me and I have to do some touch-up filing.
Mhm. Mhm. Okay, thank you.
Okay, my cables are not where they're supposed to be. Let's see, get that out of the way. All right, so we now have a relatively clean fit, but I'm going to clean that up a little bit with my barrette file. Again, perfect reason to have a barrette file so that I'm only filing one side at a time and not impacting the other side. I hate when I have a perfectly clean side on, straight line on one side and then manage to mangle it because I'm sawing from the other direction. So what we've got now is this as a bottom bearing. Now, there's a fine line between I want it tucked under and it's so far under that when I put a prong on it, it's going to not, it's going to hit the end of the stone, right? So I need this to be end to end for the points where I'm going to be putting some sheet shortly. I need it to be just visible enough that I can work with it as a point. In this case, I'm looking pretty good. I think probably once I get this soldered, I'm going to round this end a little bit because it's such a sharp point when I did it that way. And I want it to better match the other side. For this, I'm still just using my usual paste flux, which is my go-to. If you want, you can always use like a Prips or something additionally to avoid some of that fire scale. You'll see me doing both. And in this case, I happen to be using the wire solder, again, hard wire solder, but it's okay to go ahead and use chip solder, paste solder if you want. I just find I use too much when I do paste solder for these delicate operations. Reposition that solder a little bit better. As always, solder follows the heat, not the torch, but the heat. So watch where your metal is getting red. And I think I talked, maybe I didn't talk about it in this series, but one of the reasons I really like the paste flux is that it gives you subconscious clues once you learn how to read it. When it goes from paste to white crispy stage, it's got all of its water out of it. And then when you go from that stage to either a clear or reddish clear, state, as it goes to that glassy state, that's when you are getting your metal beneath it up to temperature. That's when it's getting to soldering temp. And it's I find it easier to find that color shift in the paste flux than in other fluxes I've used. But that's just me. Your mileage may vary. Okay, so I got to do a little cleanup to this, both because it's a little grubby in soldering and because it does in fact have a very sharp point on the end of it, which is going to be a little too much for this stone. So I'm just going to blunt and reshape that curve. We're going to be hiding the actual point in the prong that we're going to make. But I just still want it a little bit blunted to follow the line. Now, if you have a really well calibrated stone, I'm going to recommend that you check that it looks good both directions. Oops, I'm not on screen for you guys. Sorry. Wrong camera. There we go. Confuses me when I have 4. Okay, so if you have a really well calibrated stone, make sure that your shape fits well either direction, and you'll know that you have something nicely laid out. In my case, this stone is a little lopsided, but I still want to fix this curve. This end is a little rounder than this end. So I'm going to do some gentle adjustment with the pliers, rounding the pointy end a little bit. And this is one of my favorite tweaks that I use for small parts. I use my half round pliers probably more than just about any pair of pliers in my pile of pliers. And it's because they can act as multiple things. But most what I like in doing little work is that I can do these tiny little twist actions. You'll see me grip and twist ever so slightly, which can bow something out or flatten something in. So in this case, I'm trying to put a little bit better curve right about here. So I start my grip just off to the side. Can I get the angle where you guys can see it? No, I can't from there. Let me draw this. So if we're looking straight down on our half round pliers, right? What I'm doing is I'm pinching, starting a little bit off center, and then I'm pivoting the whole piece against the pliers. So this, me taking this action, will take a curve that goes like this, hitting right there, and bow it outward so that it does more of this, right? Or if I have it pinched right there and I go the other way, it flattens it. And this is a really subtle transition of learning how to very lightly grip your piece with your pliers and so on. But man, if you're like me and you spent your first few years of making settings spending literally hours getting the shapes of things, as soon as you can figure out the nuance of this tiny little movement to make your adjustments, it's going to rock your world, because you can see just a tiny little torque, and I'm barely gripping and I'm barely pulling just to get a little more movement. I use this a lot in chain making. I use it a lot in these bezels. Small adjustments make all the difference. And then if I want to go the other way to get this one a little flatter, I'm going the other direction with my push. Or occasionally I'll switch over to a pair of flat pliers if I need to take a really curvy piece out. So the flat pliers can do a little bit of straightening where I need to. And voila, I'm at a much more evenly spaced, evenly laid out visual on my stone. I mean, on my bearing. I want to see how that looks in the setting now, because I'm always, after those kinds of adjustments, going to have to make sure that I'm not overhanging anywhere I didn't expect or underhanging anywhere I need material. So I've got just enough that my prongs will sit out there. I can actually trim a little bit more off of the pointy end, I think. And while this isn't super well calibrated, it does sit nicely from both directions. Now I'm just going to take that little smidge off. And I'm somewhat convinced that adjusting things with your pliers is part of the magic that a lot of people go through as they transition from I'm starting my jewelry practice to, hey, I'm now doing things comfortably that I couldn't think of doing last year kind of thing. Because it sort of sneaks up on you where suddenly you realize the things that were fighting you in your early practice are now just happening. And it's your instincts, it's your muscle memory and your things that have worked memory sort of processing everything into one big act of, oh yeah, that's what I should be doing in order to move this metal. And you start to think about the piece more holistically rather than each separate activity that you do. I guess I'm feeling waxing philosophical today. Because I had my head down in data sets all day. I need something more interesting for today. Oops. Yeah, there's definitely an end that belongs at one end or the other on this. So I'm going to have that be my upper bearing. And now with the second piece that we cut when we did the initial one, we're going to cut a second bearing. As with the earlier settings, this could be the exact same size bearing, or it could be a little smaller. It can't be larger. Always remember, there's a really lovely illustration from John on this on, where is it? Page. Way back early on page 92. He talks about the angles that you can put in. And on page 93, he talks about their proportional height to one another. So those are worth a read if you haven't read up on them before you start setting up your first basket setting. And then on the top of page 94, he shows you the what I like to call the Goldilocks effect when he writes these do's and don'ts, which is it's too large, it's too small, or it's just right. So page 94 at the top, again, it's about the visual impact. Other than too big or too small, it's about the visual impact we're going for in our setting relative to the design. So do we want this stone to be set up in here, facety and everything, nice high-tech facets? Do we want it set straight up and down, which gives it a very sort of like solid set look? Oops, I'm way out of focus here. Come on, back in focus. There we go. So if I do it upright, that gives a very like I am a pillar kind of look to it, which is one impact. Or do we want it to have the potentially more graceful and delicate angled look, right? Do we want our settings to do that? In which case our lower bearing needs to be smaller, but not too small relative to the upper bearing that we've built, right? Stylistically, I'm not a huge fan of the impact of the uprights. I feel like stones themselves are the centerpiece. And if you make something that solid upright look, I find it feels overwhelming to most stones, but it's going to really depend on what effect you want on your work. So in this case, I'm going to do one ever so slightly smaller. And we're going to do that whole mark the middle thing. Again, I could take that round, that soft measuring tape and mark it out. But in this case, I'm going to eyeball it. Usually I'm pretty good on these kind of eyeballs. And then this is one where we're going to cut through. This is the first point that we are building on these. I think I need to clean up my bench pin, get myself some more usable connection points. Gonna need a lot of filing. Okay, as with the upper bearing, we're getting ourselves that mitered angle. Remembering that we had to go steeper than I initially thought, so I'm going to start out a little steeper this time. A little more clean out. Not getting a steep enough angle on this one. That makes me happier. Okay, over to our soldering block. Hard solder again. Marquis and Trillion are probably my two favorite stone cuts, other than some of the super fancy abstract or unusual faceted cuts that some of the advanced stone cutters are doing. Something about the slight curvature that I really like. Far more interesting to me than square or emerald. Check on the other side. Okay, once again, back to use those tiny adjustments with the pliers to get a nice fit. This time I'm going a little bit smaller, a little bit tighter than the curve on the lower one. So I can start out a little more vehemently, but I want to not be so small by comparison that I can't get the good angle on the prongs. So one of the things I have to fix on this one, you'll see there's a big curve on this side and a small curve on that side. So I have to bring one out to match. See how it's matching the proportions of this one. Smaller, still maintaining that curvature. Need it a little smaller. So one thing to watch out for if you get a stone that's got a very round belly to it is that I have accidentally made a lower bearing that was too small for the part of the belly that stuck through. It's a really badly cut stone when that happens. I don't need much on this one because this is not so much going to be supporting the belly as it is just the components of the setting. So this is going to be fairly close fitting. So I can get away with pretty small on this. Just not getting so small that I can't get my angle I'm looking for out of this. So notice as I'm tightening it in that the end that's soldered is getting rounder, while the end that I'm pulling in is getting sharper. So I'm trying to make some adjustments before I commit too far. And checking what my proportions will be. So that's not feeling like it's going to be much of a change. I think I still want this snugged in a little bit more. And if you were to say, how much is just right in this setting? I would have to quote John, and he would say, enough. That's how much you need, enough. Thanks, John. Okay, I'm pretty happy with it. As a general rule, I find when I'm doing a lower bearing that's smaller, I tend to want one that, except for in really, really tiny stones where it's going to be too steep, I tend to want my smaller, my underbearing to just fit inside of the upper bearing. I don't want it way smaller, but that gives me a good ratio. And I'm going to try and use the direction that we got from Alan while he was here and cut from the inside. So I could turn my saw blade around, or I can turn my piece around. I can do any number of things just to get this positioned where I want. I'm going to try this, cut from this side. Yeah, I still have more control, I think, coming in from the front where I can see where I'm headed. Ugh, yuck. Angled that one. So I didn't get a good clean cut. I'm gonna have to definitely do some filing cleanup on this. Fair amount of filing cleanup if I saw that little bit off. Okay, again, using my beloved barrette file, so I don't take material away on the other side by accident. So I've got a longer, one side longer than the other, so I think I need to actually trim a little more away completely. Fortunately. Looking when you connect those. If I didn't get a perfectly clean saw fit, I'm gonna have to do a little adjusting with the pliers. Before I bother soldering, I want to make sure I didn't get too small with that last trim. Now we're still in good range. Hopping on over. All right. I know it's lots and lots of steps to get two very small little pieces of material. Zoom out a bit if I can. That's a little bit less of the glare. All right, so one of the things that I want to do is, before I go further, is I want to flatten these to make sure that I didn't put too much warp in. And then I'm going to touch up the curvature again and check my filing. My favorite for this kind of flattening is this Bonnie Doon. I wish I had known about it years before I did. I love, my second choice is a wooden mallet, but they're hard to find really good ones these days. A lot of them are too light for my taste. I don't quite want a leaded mallet. So the Bonnie Doon is definitely top. And last but not least is the doggy chew toy of a rawhide mallet. Okay, so I've definitely got some bowing at one end that I want to even out a little bit to get more of a consistent shape. But once again, between the flat pliers and the half round pliers, I'm going to even things out a little bit. This is another trick. Is that on camera? There we go. If you have a point and you're trying to bow something equally on both sides, you can put your half round in there and use it as sort of a fulcrum. You got to be careful not to bang up your end too much, but just that act of putting something with an already equal curvature in it and pushing against it can even out your curves. Which that one I went the wrong direction because I went thinner, not thicker. So let's see how we're looking. So that's not a bad combo. I think I want to get the curvature of the bottom one even flatter because it's got a little bit rounder feel to it than the upper piece. And I'd like them to have a nice, even relationship. I'm going to flatten this out a little. This out, it's got a couple lumps. And one end is a little pointier than the other on each of them. That's feeling pretty good to me. If you've got well calibrated stones and you happen to luck across a Marquis bezel mandrel or something, first of all, tell me where you found it. The only one I have is this very small. It might be big enough for what we're doing. Let me see. I have this for doing bezel settings, and I could put it on here again, a little healthier if I'm doing something that's already calibrated, because otherwise this may have too big of a curve for me. I just did it to the upper one, didn't I? And I've now wrecked the curve that I put in there. Not too bad. Okay. So if need be, put it on mandrels to help you get your forming done well. Let me do one, I might as well do the other. And it'll also help you make sure that your points are lined up and so on. So I'm feeling pretty good about that. I think that'll be a good difference in the angle, and they're roughly well shaped together. So we'll go with that. And while I'm at it, I'm going to just mark my tops so that I remember which direction I wanted them in relation to one another. And I'm going to set those aside for a few moments. Any questions so far? I know that feels like hours and hours on just making a couple of little shapes, but it's more precision than the chain making would be. Anyone? Bueller? Anyone?
I don't know.
Okay.
I have a question.
Sure.
Like, it just seems like you're duplicating the same shape twice.
Yep.
What if you just cut the same size twice and just cut one a little smaller?
You could absolutely do that. You're still going to need those interim steps to get the point and the curve in place. So that's basically what he had us do when he told us to cut 2 pieces of wire that were twice the size of the stone, or twice the length of the stone plus a little bit. He gave us the starting point for that. And then we worked our way in from it. Could you have done these at the same time? Absolutely. You're gonna, if you cut both of them and get the same curvature at the beginning, one of them you're still going to have to, if you want to get it smaller, you're still going to have to then work it beyond that point to get you there. So it's 6 of one, half dozen of the other, I think, on order of operations on that one. Other than that, you want to make sure you're getting the clean, crisp cut. And I'm sort of heading in the direction of understanding why he wants us doing a crisp cut on each of these corners. Because when I was doing those manipulations with the pliers, there was a much more fixed anchor point at each corner than there would have been if I had done the fold version, right? So if I just folded that metal and then soldered that seam, there'd be a big heavy lump at the point. By having a sharp, crisp cut, the solder helps act as an anchor. It's much more stiff than the material around it. So when I'm shaping, I'm really shaping all the material from the solder point up. So I could be sold on this solder both ends, cut and solder both ends. I see reasons for it now that we're doing it. Any other questions before I move on to our
Thank you.
prongs? Okay, let's do some prongs. So this setting could be a number of variations on the settings. Let's do some doodling again. Too many tools on my bench. I'll move a few away. Okay, so one of the choices that we have on this marquee is do only prongs, only wire prongs, right? So straight up basket setting. And that could be here and here, and here and here, and it would hold. John also, oops, I'm out of frame. There we go. Come on, back in frame. There we go. John also, and so that view on top would be this kind of prong, right? We'd have separate prongs on either side. Get another color so those show. So prong, 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 prong. John also tells us in the book, although it's contrary to what I've learned from other folks, that on a marquee setting, as long as they're sturdy enough, you can do a single prong at each end. I'm wary of this simply because if you have an uncalibrated stone and one side has more curve than the other, like this particular stone does, it's a little easier for it to slide its way out. I was taught 3 points of contact, but he's the master, so I'm sure it's functionally works. It's just pardon?
Would that be better with a thicker gauge metal?
Yeah, definitely. I would bump up my wire. I mean, it's going to again depend on the proportions of the stones. So if you're doing tiny stones, sure, little itty bitty bits of 16 gauge is not a big deal. And also, frankly, this style may be perfectly easy to use in like a white gold or a platinum, which is going to have less flex than a silver is. So that's some of it, is what materials are you using? And yeah, this will hold. Would I put it as a ring setting? No, personally, I wouldn't, because if one of them gets peeled out a little bit, the stone is going flying. So I don't know. I'm uncomfortable with that, but my variation on it is to instead do a split prong where you might have a thicker thing and you do some kind of double prong from the side. This is not going to show up in the green. Let me do it this way, where you're putting your prong connected, like you take what is the name? Is it figure eight? Not figure eight wire, double half round wire. There's a name for it when it comes like that. And you can make a prong out of that and just cut this down the middle and split it so that it goes one to one side and one to the other side, right? That's one way to make that kind of a prong. And you can do the sheet prongs that we're talking about today, which would give you, like, if this were a sheet prong instead of a wire prong, I'd have no problem with it. My purple pen is dying. Hang on a sec. So if I were doing just the ends and did something like this, yeah, I'd absolutely believe that that's nice and stable. The one that worries me is wire prongs as the ends. But we can do, once we've got that, we can also do some additional prongs out of wire, right? I mean, theoretically, design-wise, it would still functionally work if you did the reverse of that and you did a wire prong at each end. And then you did sheet prongs along the side. That's a choice. I don't know that it's a terribly attractive one, but it's a choice. So it's about having enough capture of the stone to keep it down onto the bearing that we're building, that we've just built, right? So I'm going to say this variation, let's try, we're going to do definitely the end sheet ones. So we're going to do this kind of a prong, whether we do them as squared off or whether we do them as that chevron type that I like so much. Either one would work. And we could choose to do a single prong on either side out of wire. Or we can try for the slightly more challenging double prong that he does, or 2 pairs. So I'm going to start with my sheet prongs and get us structurally built. And we'll go from there. This gets more interesting. This exercise gets more interesting when you go to really unusually cut stones. Stones that have concave curves on them, in addition to convex, or that have corners into curves, but are not a consistent shape all the way around. And that's when you start playing with, do I put a prong or a sheet prong on a corner to hold it stable? Where do I put what kind of prongs? What do I need? I need my sheet. Okay. So I am using 22 gauge for this. He says 24 gauge, but says nothing about the scale of your work when you're doing that. And this is a big enough stone that I'm going to be more comfortable using a 22 gauge. You can always go heavier, just like when we're cutting in corners and so on the chapter 3 bezel settings. You can do filing down at an angle to get to thin the top metal that's going to fold over while still giving yourself the heft of it all. I am looking for my pad of paper. There it is. Hang on a sec. No, there go all my drill bits. Bear with me a sec, gang. So having seen how awfully uneven my prongs are for the one that I just redid, I'm going to do a little bit of work to make this one cleaner. And there's the best way for me to do that is to make sure I'm sawing instead of hand cutting, shear cutting, and for me to make a template that I repeat. So in terms of height on these, I want to have room for it to come over the top of the stone and go under the coulette of the stone with a little bit of wiggle room for filing and sanding and what have you. And then I also want to leave myself a little extra to stick into the bench block, into the soldering block. So I'm going to give myself a little more than I might otherwise, just to do that approach. So I'm looking at something that is about yay tall. Put that out. It's the strip that I'm aiming for. And in terms of how far along the stone I want it to go, I tend to look at the facets since every stone is cut a little differently. And for example, I've got very long first facets on this. They are about yay long. That much is one facet. And I don't think I'd want to cover that much of it. So I might look at it proportionally and do about half of the facet or a little less, just to give the movement of the eye downward towards the rest of the facets. Because the facets on the center of it are a lot shallower than, well, no, I guess they're about the same. A little bit narrower here than on the end facets. So I'm going to pick something that is enough to hold, but also enough to give a nice visual impact when I'm looking at it from the top. So that's showing, oh, I'm out of screen for you guys. God, guys, I'm sorry. Keep popping out of the area. So this is what I'm looking at, is I'm going to take about that wide, and then I need to have double. Let me put my first marks down so that I can actually see where I'm working. So this is my height that I'm working at. And then I'm going to have, oh, it's nice and evenly laid out for me. How nice. So I'm going to have a prong that at the top is this wide. And I like mine to taper. So since I'm making myself a pattern, I may as well build in the taper to my pattern. And graph paper like this. Oops, except I got to go to the right one. Start that again. So 2, 4. Wow. Let's try this completely again. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's my height. And maybe for a novel concept, I might want to get a straight edge ruler to help me with this. Figure out where I left my straight edge ruler when I was cleaning up. Go. So I'm going to go not corner to corner, but corner to mid. Knowing that the bottom end of this is going to be stuck down into the material of the fire brick. Actually, I think I want to give myself a little bit more of a point beneath that. So here's what I'm going to make for a template. And I'm going to just cut this out of the graph paper first. So I've got a little tiny template that I can hold up to my stone and see if I like where it's likely to fold, knowing that it'll be a little bit shy of this because it's going to be made of a thicker metal than the paper I've got. But that gives me the sense of where it's going to land on the stone, right? And then I like to, when I'm making a template, I like to take a piece of manila envelope and glue it down. Where did I leave my glue is the question. I should have made myself a chart of where I moved everything. Nothing is where it was. I tried to do it by things I use most versus things I use least in my daily practice, but that doesn't quite help with the teaching practice. I'm just using an all-purpose glue stick because I want it to stick, but not stick to everything in the world. Come on, stick. And trim that out. Another nice thing, if you take the time to do these, if there's a set of stone shapes and sizes that you work with consistently, you can leave yourself some base templates. You know, if you've got a whole set of calibrated Marquis stones, and you know you're going to work on them in your next collection, if they're well calibrated enough, you can make a template for how much wire you need and what the curvature is, and you can make a template for your prongs, and then it's minor modifications from there. Oop, get that glued better than I did.
Rachel,
Mm-hmm.
where does it show the paper and the way you laid it out and all of that?
Nowhere. This is me telling you that I made a very messy, like in John's part of it, he's like, and then you cut a strip out and you file it the way you
Okay.
want it. In my
Okay, 'cause
world,
that
I
was
too
lost.
messy. Pardon?
I felt lost. I'm like, where is
Nope,
that?
this is not, this is me saying from that one that we've got in the tumbler right now and from the earlier one, I was displeased with the quality of my own prong making. And I'm trying to make sure that I'm slowing down, giving myself something more consistent, and something repeatable is what I really want.
Okay.
So now I can trace this out. Enough width on these lower ones, I think I do. So now I can score the pattern down. Flatten my metal first, though. And whenever possible, I try to do my long straight edge against something that is already cut straight for me. And for this width. Sorry, yeah, that's a great question. Whenever you see me go off on something that you don't see in the book, please feel free to ask if I'm working with something John gave us and it's just a different page. This is me trying to improve my practice as part of this exercise, which means I'm going to saw instead of trim, which would be my instinct.
Oh, yeah. I've been looking for those mandrels that I thought I had. And yours are much bigger than, I have these tiny little mandrels that I thought were much bigger.
So I know that the place that I used to get them was Statura, but I haven't seen them carry them in a while. And I'm told that Auto Fry has a set that is similar.
Oh, okay.
Rio's, I think, is not of the same design. Oops, I've got material in the way. Let me trim stuff out of my path of cutting. Yeah, I got them primarily for using as chain making mandrels, more than bezel mandrels. Because at no point in my lifetime career do I expect to make a heart-shaped bezel.
Yeah. Or a star-shaped bezel.
I've actually made star-shaped ones.
Really?
Kind of set from enameled stars, I think.
Oh, okay.
Not fun.
No. The mandrel is a little scary to me.
Sorry, say again.
That mandrel is so pointy, it's a little scary to me.
I'm gonna clean up my edges before I cut this off, just because it gives me something to grip. So I'm again trying to up my precision game a little bit on this one. Points don't need to really be cleaned up, but have it. And deburring my saw edge and stuff like that. So taking a little more care with the in-between steps to get something neater. Come back here. Okay. One more template. go. Now, let's see if the magic works again, using more precision. More precision. Holding it down. So again, this angle is just one that appeals to me relative to the stone. Having each side be roughly half as wide at the base as it is at the top of the prong. But your design may vary on that. So do what works for your aesthetic. And it doesn't have to be angled, it can be straight up and down prongs. Lost one of my lines. But I have a template, so I can put it back. So another way to get matching shapes is to glue together two sheets of metal and cut them as a pair. That's done a lot when you're working with much heavier materials, so that because it's so much harder to get a clean duplicated line. But if you start working with a regular gauge of metal over and over again and want to repeat your pattern, glue some strips together so that they're available when you need them. Okay, let's see how close, oops, I gotta take the edges off of this one and then see how closely they match. Darn sight better match than I expected. Yay. So there's a little bit of wiggle at the top that I'm going to need to clean off anyhow when I get to the filing stage. So I now have two prongs of the height I need plus a little bit to attach into my block. Now I need to do the creasing of them. And that's a little more challenging now. I probably should have measured it out while I was in the middle of mapping it out, but oh, I guess I can take it from here. I can mark my line by using the pattern. So the pattern, if I have my line marked out, one of the ways to put your line down, the other side, not exactly opposite sides, is to just do with your scorer of some kind, just do a series of dots, as long as you don't move your pattern. Just punched through the line to give you something to follow. Wow, that is not a straight line though. I'm going to try measuring to make sure that I get a better line than that. Let's see. But yes, you can use your pattern to mark it out. Trick from doing waxworking models like that too, putting your lines down by punching them. Okay, so what do we got at the top? We have 10.05. And in this case, because I'm not going down a straight edge, I'm just marking my tops from both sides to give myself a center line between those two marks. And then I can do the same thing at the bottom. Should be pretty close to what I've got. Oops, my Sharpie. I'm very envious of people for whom this kind of fiddly little work is easy. Because I always find myself futzing with it more than I want to. So now what I'm doing is I'm using my saw blade to put my mark, my straight line down the middle. Very slow and steady, because I need to give myself a crease down which I'm about to file. Do both of those. Oh, don't fight me. All right, so now that I've got the mark, I'm going to my triangle file. And in this one, it's a steeper corner than we're going to get. It's a steeper corner than we're going to get on a square setting. So we not only have to go with our triangle file down our line, which is going to be challenging if I can't get a grip on this. There we go. But we're going to follow up with the square, and we may have to do some of the technique we learned in chapter 3, where we're doing a bit of sawing and pushing closed and sawing and pushing closed to get our more acute angle on the fold. But it all starts the same way with this slow and steady triangle file down the line we just sawed. From both directions, except that I'm going off my track. Okay, my filing on this one is not happy. That one there. All right, and I'm going to pick up with a square file to get a little bit wider cut. Figure out where I put my square file. Sorry, you little guy. Triangle. What's a triangle file? Where's the square? There we go. Just put it away. As a reminder, when you are trying for 90 degrees, you still do most of your work with that triangle file and then touch up at the very last minute with the square file, or else you'll have too wide a cut for a good 90 degree. All right. I'm going for my parallel jaw pliers for this first bend. And because it's so small, it's not that pair of parallel jaw pliers though. They're my regular flush parallel jaw. Had them out earlier. Oh, there they are, just buried. Okay, so as with the other things we've been doing with the parallel jaw pliers, we are not moving the pliers to bend, we are moving the work. And when it's this small, sometimes I find I need to actually just grab another pair of pliers and start the bend. Make sure I'm on path, which I am not right now. There we go. So just enough to get it starting to bend, and then I'll come in and use the hammer to make the better fold. And I tend to want to check it creased from both sides, grabbing the pliers in there and just working the bend from each half, or rather from each side of the fold, just to make sure I got it clean. That's getting me my 45. Let's get the one that I just dropped on the ground after all that hard work. Get them both folded to the same level. One for time, 620. Okay. So again, starting the bend and then working the tool from there. So I'm already much happier with the cleanness of these two prongs, how they look relative to one another. Similar angles, similar proportions. Could probably still use a little bit of filing and cleanup, but they're a lot more consistent than the ones that I did for the square. So I'm pretty happy with that. And now I need to start looking at them in the context of the piece. And I see that I do in fact need to trim a little bit off of one side. Looks like I didn't quite hit my mark when I filed. Do that before it gets harder to get to. If anybody has favorite tools they use for gripping tiny parts, by all means, shout them out or put them in chat. This is one of my biggest frustration points is once I'm working with the fiddly bits, how do I manage? Okay, so we got a nice crisp 90-degree angle with that triangle square combination. Now the only thing we have to get in further is to take the saw and cut down our fold line very carefully because we don't want to overcut. This works under the same principles we were using when we cut the miter as we were setting the corners of cornered stones with either prong or step bezel. We're taking material away and then we're going to close it tighter. Taking material away, close it tighter. And you want to do this in very small increments because it goes faster than you think. So just that one set of filing and already I'm almost where I need to be, right? I think I need to actually put a little curve into this because it's hitting the curve. And this is one of the trickier parts for me. I fight with this a lot, is how do I get that curved spot in there? And the best I've found so far is mangling it with the half rounds because it's so small that trying to hammer it down. I tried hammering it down on a round mandrel and found that I was hitting a certain limit of how far I could go. Okay, I curved it too much. So I'm going to trim it back a little bit from that. Pretty
So
good.
Rachel,
Yep.
what saw blade are you using? Are you using it the thickness of the actual prong that you're making, or you just
I am, for this activity right now, I'm using a 2/0 on 22 gauge because that's my kind of default that I go to. If
Okay.
you were doing a more delicate cornering exercise, drop your saw blade down even finer. But in this case, I know that my material can put up with this amount of material taken away. Oops, except that I got to do the other one, not the one that I just did.
Thank you.
Yep. Always err for something this delicate, err on the side of much thinner than you think. Because the worst that happens is you work a lot harder to make your cut. And the best that happens is you don't eat up and cut through your material faster than you realize.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I did a little bit of sawing in, and now I'm going to do the tightening of the fold. That's darn near perfect for that one. Let's see. I think I may have discovered another reason John is recommending the cut and point, and that is that it's a lot easier to fit a sharply angled piece than the curved piece of the Marquis. So my prong is fitting better on the side that was more steeply cut in. Right, so we're not only checking, is it going to fit well on the top of the bearings, but we also have to make sure that we don't forget about the little guy beneath. And that they're going to fit well connected at both points. Because the first thing we're going to connect is the lower. And I've got two pointy ends on this and one that needs a little cleanup. And I figured out my top, so I'm going to now pop this over to the bench, and we're going to try and get it set up for soldering. I hope you appreciate that I gave you guys a clean brick side today, so you could actually see this in action, hopefully.
It's lovely.
Yeah. I was getting tired of fighting all of the flux that was on the other one. So
We're in the
I have made
studio.
that extra little bit of the prong. And I'm putting it down in, and I'm putting my big piece, my upper bearing away in favor of, do I have the right side up? I do have the right side up. Now do I have the right corner? That one. And I'm going to see if I still fought this a little bit. I practiced it a bit more with the redo. I think it may be a little easier on a Marquis than trying to get 4 corners set. So remember to make sure that you're keeping the same height on both sides so that your prongs are actually getting connected at the same width point, but that looks like a fairly solid little setup. I've got snug fit on my prongs. And I'm going to go with the hard solder. And as we learned in the last session, one of the things that happens here is that the sheet heats up faster than the wire. So we need to watch for overheating. That was when things started to go awry on last session, was when I melted some of the upper part of the sheet. So a little hotter than that. I'm going to get my flux crisped, and then I'm going to put solder on the inside, again using the hard solder. I like to, especially when I'm at an at-risk soldering exercise where it's overheating, I like to try and position all my solder bits that I can at once, so that if it does go to temp, I'm at least getting the other one to flow. There we go. That flowed nicely. Yay. Ooh, that was a much smoother soldering than last time. All right. So we now have our base set up, and we're going to go back and do a little straightening because this can warp as we do it before we position the upper bearing. So always test at each stage of this soldering exercise. Even if you don't put both prongs on at once, test between prongs. Make sure you're still straight where you expect to be straight. So like I can see I've got a little bit of a tilt on everything here. I need to see what happens when I move this position out a little bit, because that's where we start to potentially warp the lower bearing, and I want to get that all straightened out before I put my next level up. So nice starting point. A little warp still. And it may torque a little bit. We want them facing each other. We want them upright. And we want to not have the wire warping too much as we pull them outward for our next tier, which was my upright. I managed to wipe it off. Okay. And in an ideal world, this is a snug enough fit that it's going to hold itself in place. But if not, we're going to put in some kind of dividers to keep it in place. And you can see that already this amount of pull is further warping that lower one. So I'm going to have to sort of work back and forth to straighten things out, while still letting the prongs move their way outward as needed. And the other thing that we need to check as we're setting this, as we're positioning this rather, is whether we have the right proportions for our stone so that our collet is not poking through the far side of the setting. So this should still be able to capture the stone as expected. And I'm going to say I need to take a little bit off the pointy end of this to make it fit comfortably. It was fitting so nicely a moment ago. Here we go. So what I care about in getting this fitted is that my two end points are proportional heights. They're the same height from where they solder the lower bearing and where they solder the upper bearing. So I don't want it tipping on me. It's fighting very hard. I need to tip. Oh my goodness, come on. Open these out a little bit more. Oh, guy. I'm gonna see if this is any easier to fit when it's stuck down into the brick, because I'm fighting. It wants to flip flop on me. So let's see if that helps with my management of the upper bearing. I have it stuck in there. Stuck it. Okay, so now that I've got a stable base, let's see if it's going to battle me as hard. Nope, that was the magic. All right, so now I just need to make sure that I am seated consistently. So I'm going to do this solder because it's fighting me so hard. I'm going to do this solder in 2 stages. I'm going to solder the end that is low enough that I'm happy with it. And then I'm going to reposition so that I have that as a stabilizer. John has in the book that we're doing these as sets. I'm not going to do them in sets if I think I'm going to fail doing them that way, because I can't get the position that I want. So in this case, I'm going to tack down 1 and then reposition to get it right. There we go. Nicely connected. Cool it off. And now I can be more aggressive about getting part 2 into place. Because now I have something pulling the other side for me, supporting it. All right, let's do part 2. Okay. All right, we now have our 2 prongs, and this would be enough unto itself. Like we could stop here, and I think for today we will, and I'll probably play around with putting the prongs on separately or just leave it as is because it's running later than I expected to on this part. But that is a sturdy setting. That's going to hold it because it's not like I was talking about my nervousness about having a single wire prong. This is really 4 points of connection. 1, 2, 3, 4. And so I'm going to put this in a pickle. Take any questions on this, and then grab what is in the tumbler, and we'll talk about setting that one. And that'll be the night. Questions?
No.
Oops, I got somebody posted a message. Was it a thing that holds materials that was posted? My chat is not catching up with me. Oh, there we go. Suda, see you later. Questions about the setting and how it differed from our other settings and how it was the same. The steps. Any surprises in there for anyone?
I
Need
have
to
a simple
digest.
question.
Yep, sure.
I've been trying, in the past, I was taught to flux and then put the little pieces of solder and then just sort of spray with whatever, the flux again. And I started doing like what you were doing with the little ball.
Mhm.
And sometimes it sticks to the solder pick and sometimes it doesn't. So I was wondering if I was doing something wrong.
So what may not be shown on screen because it's just below the camera lens is that I often dip my pick in my flux. And then you'll notice I'm also heating the pick as I pick up the ball. And that combination is what grabs it to the pick. Neither of the ways that you described is wrong. It's just sometimes it doesn't want to stick. And I drop bits of solder all the time, even using the flux. John actually likes to do a double flux. He'll flux with paste flux. He'll heat it to the white crispy. He'll put more paste flux down, and he leaves his chip solder in a puddle of flux when he's working and picks it up from there. And so it's the combination, it's flux. So the way he described why he does double fluxing is that the first one degreases and gets everything out of the way, because your flux, even if it's a good quality flux, is not going to stick to any oily surface where there are fingerprints and so on. So it puts the coating down, burns off anything, and then the second time he fluxes, it makes sure you have a full coating on the whole piece. And then the extra flux on the bits of solder is making sure that they don't oxidize before they hit the piece you're working on. I've just never gotten myself into the double flux habit, but I do pick up bits of flux. The big problem is it kind of gunks up your pick over time, and you have to either scrape it off if you notice it or grind it off if you don't, and it piles up. So, yeah. Any other questions on this? And are folks up for me doing the initial setting of the cushion, or would we like to call it a night? I'm good either way. I'm usually good to go till about 7:30 my time at the latest, and I think we can do that. We can
I'm
go.
okay with it.
You're okay with it? Showing it? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go grab that out of the tumbler and think of any other questions you got in the meantime. So much nicer than the first one of these, but still, I should have used a template. Because boy, these prongs do not make me happy. All right, so what do I want to set this in? I think, what do I have that's easy and quick? I think I want to set this in shellac, because I have shellac ready. All right, so we talked in earlier sessions about materials to put things in. in general, the shellac, you aren't going to want to heat with your torch the way I'm about to. Do as I say, not as I do, but I don't have my alcohol set up right now, the alcohol burner, which is what would be better for this. So I'm going to just be careful with my heating and position this.
Don't smell it.
You can smell it from there.
Hopefully not.
So I'm just pushing a little of the shellac up to hold. I don't want it held too tightly, but I do want a little bit of material up and over so it doesn't want to wiggle out. And I want not enough material in the bottom that it gets in the way of the stone sitting in there. See how that does. Give that a moment to cool. You can also do the cheat and put some water on it to cool it. It'll still take a moment to get from the hot burn you badly stage. Give that a moment while we wait. Any other questions?
How would you remove the stone from that without hurting it with the heat?
So, so that you can use a heat gun. Instead of, you can use a heat gun or just a low flame, like an alcohol burner. Heat gun is what's actually recommended. I have no freaking idea where my heat gun is in my crazy pile of tools that I haven't unpacked since I moved here. And that won't damage anything other than I would probably be cautious of it around opals and that sort of thing. But I think I probably would be cautious of any of the goop getting into those softer stones. Yeah, and frankly, I haven't put enough on here that I couldn't chip it off if I needed to. So I've literally just put like little blobs over the frame. I should have done it a little flatter than I did, but it's otherwise in okay shape. And if I can figure out where I put the stone. What was that? Another question?
Nope.
I just need to find my little dop stick of this is again the wolf wax that I'm using, which I can pick up either individually or I put it on the end of a toothpick to make something a little more delicate. And the challenge is that I did have one direction that this stone fit better than the others. So I just want to see whether I've got the right way. That looks fairly good. If this was on a piece, I could do it in my graver's block. There's lots of different ways to set this up for the setting. All of these start with a firm base of some kind that I can grip the piece with. And let's see, we got so many possible tools to play around with. So I've got the one that was made by Lion's Punch Forge by Chris over at Lion's Punch Forge, which he makes out of old hex keys. That would work for this, but I'm looking for something with a little bit wider surface. Early in the book, John talks about he likes his to be a little bit rectangularly shaped. So I think I'm going to go with one of the ones that we made early on. This is just made from brass rod that I hammered down to give myself the shape that I wanted. And then I cleaned it up on the Tripoli wheel. And then the thing that I always was sort of like, what? Why didn't I know that sooner? Is that John takes his very coarse file and does not leave it at a high polish. He just does this little tap across it to give it a tiny bit of grip so that it doesn't go sliding on him. And that makes all the difference in the world. So since I have already cut these prongs, they're pretty much ready to go. And then it's a matter of, oh, I'm missing a very important part, the cutting in. Sorry, that was the very, very important point. So we need to do our little fold cut that when we're doing straight up prongs, nice and easy. But when we have this kind of a cut, it becomes a problem because I can't get a file in that corner. So I have to do something with another kind of tool. In this case, I'm going to be using a heart burr, but the same principles apply that we did on our earlier cutting in, which is that we're going to mark where the stone meets the piece. In this case, I cheated because I needed that mark anyhow for where I was going to make my V of the prongs. So I know that my marks should all show up. And that tells me that I don't have the stone facing the right direction. There we go. There we go. That's what I probably needed. So the marks just meet at the point at the center of the sawing away that I did before. Too shallow there. Yes. Okay. So in doing this, I'm leaving myself a point that is just above where I want my fold to happen. So when I'm cutting in, I'm going to be cutting in just below the marks that I've made. And get my goggles on because this is a burr action. I am using the smallest heart burr that I have. I wish I had smaller for this activity, because one of the things I find hardest to do on this is control it. And you may see it skip beyond the piece and then it scratches the back. And so I'll have to clean up from that. In fact, before I even start on this, I'm going to show you on my test piece, because that'll help us get an awareness of what the cutting in action is going to do in this corner. So if this is my line, I want to cut in just below it so that when it folds, that line represents where it hits the edge of the stone. And I found the easiest way to get into these corners is to start my heart burr right at the fold to give myself a little grip, and then work up once. Yeah, that's the flip that I'm talking about, because I'm not going very fast. So I work up from the center and then I work back from the center to cut in my line. And I hate it wants to flip to the far side. I don't have good enough control with my hands on the little stuff until I catch it on the far side. I can control it coming towards me. I can't control it as well going away. So it keeps wanting to do that jump. So that's all I'm doing is I'm running a little channel in, starting down in the center. And then I've found that on the not quite 90-degree angle ones, I have to go back and dig in my center a little bit anyhow, which is not a bad time to then take your cup burr if you're using a sharply curved stone. This one doesn't have points, so I'm not going to be cutting in. But if you were doing like a 90-degree sharp cut stone, once you've got that down, you're going to have a spot where you started your heart burr work, and you can put a ball burr right in there to give yourself the gap that you need, the air gap that we want whenever we're working with the point of a stone. So I've got this in here. I'm going right below, getting a start on it, and working out and then up. And I want to be careful not to go through, but to give myself enough material to fold. If you ever start to see lines on the far side, you have gone a smidge too far. You could fill it with solder, or if you've caught it right at the right time, then you may not have overdone it, but just be aware of that. Start in the middle. And the heart burr does, oops, there we go, that's that jump. The heart burr does the equivalent of having filed it with a triangle file, basically. Again, right below the line. And a little bit of dig in to give myself material to fold. And of course, I failed to mark my corners again, so I got to figure out which is the one that wants to keep lifting up. Okay, so I've now got a position that when I use my pusher, it's going to fold against it. So I'm pushing in and over, but I'm not going all the way over. I'm going to do one corner, the other corner. Then I'm going to go to the opposite side and do one corner. Make sure my stone doesn't move on me. One corner in, up and over. The other corner in, up and over. Again, not pushing it all the way down to the stone yet, because I want to even out my pressure from all the corners before I really go digging in. In, up and over. Yeah, I really love this chevron look. It's just elegant. Okay, so what I've discovered is I pushed too far on this side, so I'm having a hard time getting this down where I want. So I'm going to grab a handy dandy prong puller and just see if I can work that up. If it's too big, I may have to go to pliers method. Let's see. Pull this back a little bit. And pull this one back a little bit because this is the one that's trying to steal the position. All fighting a little bit. Okay. Back in. And you can feel it on a stone this size, like when you're pushing too hard against one prong, you'll feel the stone try to shift on the setting. So that's why I'm skipping a little bit around, because I can feel which ones need to counter the first push. And then I'm just working further down on all the prongs. I've got one prong that's a little longer than the other guys. Template, Rachel. Next time, template. Don't let me get away with not using a template. Keep me honest. And I also didn't get consistent V's between each of them. So this is definitely getting rebuilt again. Okay, and then this is a little small for me to get as firm a push down as I was wanting on that. So I'm going to try using my bezel rocker to get a little bit more up and over, but it's a little slipperier. So try not to use them if I can help it. And I could do some burnishing on this, but these points are going to be a little tricky to burnish without hitting the stone. So yeah, in a perfect world, all of my templated, oops, let me get that back in screen. All of my templated corners would all look like this. They'd all be exactly evenly split down the seam instead of doing this wonkiness. And I could probably pull them open and do some very careful filing and sanding. Whoop. I guess I don't have to use the heat to get it off of the material. But that is generally the gist of what I'm doing. And then I will follow up with, I've told you guys about the Swifty wheels that I love for finishing this kind of a setting, or any kind of a setting, frankly, which takes out the scratches and so on. I'll probably file this down a little bit and cut it open to try and get a better variant on the prong. And for, at least for this exercise, let me get the crap off of the top of it. So it's kind of a cool little setting. Let me bring it over to the close-up camera and you can see some of the atrocities that I'm seeing. Oops, wrong camera.
It's a really cool setting though.
It is a super cool setting. And I don't generally go for cushion cut, especially not a checkerboard style like this. But
Yeah,
I'm
it makes it
kind of.
beautiful. Yeah, it's really pretty.
Yeah.
And it's a great point about the template.
Yeah, absolutely got to use the template. But like even from the side, it has sort of like a castle
That's
effect.
gorgeous.
The taper, I like the taper. I don't like that they're not equal tapers. I like that it's got enough body to sort of feel like it's structural, while also there's no way this stone is coming out unless somebody actively pries up these top prongs. And it has a like there's the cushion with checkerboard effect is really kind of a nice sparkle.
That's
I'd be
beautiful.
interested
It's
to
just
cut in
gorgeous.
other material.
Could you turn it upside down just to see the,
Yeah. So you see how on the front, let me actually bring over the first one and you can see how much the angle impacted it. So on this one, let's see, am I in frame? There we go. On this one, you can see that I've got those arches showing up at the bottom, right up here, because I made it too much smaller. So this was in the no good on his picture that has the good, no good, no good, or no good, 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 no good sizes. It can be the same as, it can be a certain proportion smaller, but it can't be too much smaller. And this one hit the too much smaller in addition to all the other problems we had last time. So this one that we did finished one, I intentionally built my lower deck, my lower bearing to just fit inside of the ring that I made for the upper bearing. And I like those proportions a whole lot. So there you go.
So
Very
how would
cool.
you design that? Would it be a
Pardon?
ring? Would it be a pendant? How would you design it?
be,
How would
yeah.
you finish it?
It could be a pendant, it could be a center accent, a center statement stone. On, you know, if I were doing something like a hollow form with this in the middle of it, in the middle of the hollow, or at the top with the hollow form hanging down. I mean, there are people who wear earrings that have stones that size in them.
I would.
Wow.
I'm not one of them, but I not in a faceted stone anyway. So here's where we left off with the today's setting, and that one's gonna look, oops, I'm out of frame again, hang on. Let me get the stone for that. Again, if you are trying these shapes for the first time, please treat yourself right and get well cut, well calibrated stones, because man, I hate seeing people think that they're failing because they can't do it, when oftentimes it's the stone is fighting the kind of setting you're doing. So this is a terrible, terrible cut for this, but I think by the time we're done, it'll set pretty nicely. So that's today's and the one that we set.
great examples.
Good.
Yes.
Anybody got show and tell for me this time? Anyone?
I got a couple of things.
All right. Is that Betsy?
Whoops. Yes, that's me. Let me turn a light on so it's and they have stones in them. So
Woo-hoo.
Cool.
I don't, my lighting in here sucks, so let's see if this will work. This one isn't brand new, but it was a stone. I had never set this shape before. Let's see.
And
if
you're
I
wearing
can-
your finished pierced earrings, which I love. Ooh,
Yeah.
is that a coffin shape? Or is it
It's kind of a teardrop flattened top or something, but
Okay.
it's a star sapphire.
yeah. Wow. And a nice heavy bezel. I love that.
A heavy bezel, and the ring band is fused argentium.
Sweet.
Oh, you
Yeah,
can fuse
so-
that, Jenny.
Very
So
pretty.
that's one. You can see a
Yeah.
little bit of the star.
Very
Yeah, oh, the
pretty.
star is showing like crazy on my screen.
Oh, okay. And the other one that I just did, because I have been cleaning out my studio, I was going through all my wire, and I have gallery wire up the kazoo. So I did this.
What's the stone?
It's a cobalto calcite,
Ooh, nice.
which I love. So I
Yep.
did it with gallery wire, and then I did the gallery wire I don't know if this light is helping or not, but I did the gallery wire
All the way around.
all the way around.
Cool.
Maybe that's,
Very pretty.
That's awesome. So that's a great use of gallery wire because cobalto calcite is so fragile that
well,
having
it's
the
fragile and
various
it's so uneven and everything. So, and I have to polish it up a little more because I had patinaed it, but I took the patina off because it made the stone look muddy.
Mm,
So anyway,
Mm,
that's my show and tell.
beautiful.
Very
Thank
pretty.
you.
Yeah.
beautiful.
Anybody else?
Yeah.
I do.
Who's the I? Oh, there we go. Paula. Okay, so first we'll do
Yes.
Paula, then we'll do Carmen.
Okay.
Okay, this is quick. I made a
Oh.
round
Cool.
stone setting.
Yes, nice.
Oh, teacher's
Yeah.
pet.
Are you using round wire or flat wire? What did you use
Ra-
for your prongs? I can't quite tell.
Ra-
You did
round,
round?
round wire.
Nice.
Okay.
Yeah.
Very nice.
Very nice. Oh, I can't wait to see it set. And
Yeah.
you chose the same height for the lower bearing and the upper bearing too. So it's
No,
gonna have-
one is slightly, it's slight,
is it
slightly
maybe the angle?
tapered.
Okay,
Yeah,
got it. Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was the angle.
Yeah.
Cool. Go you. You said you weren't even going to try those for a while. That's awesome.
Yeah. It went on a trip for a few days, but I found it. So
Nice.
What
Intentionally?
millimeter?
it just flung
Millimeter.
while I was working on it. It flung away and pinged, and then
Oh,
I found it a few days later. So
okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I've been seeing a lot of things fly
Yeah.
lately.
Carmen, you said you had some stuff too?
Yeah. I did my first tiny, you see it?
Oh, sweet. So what is that, about a 4 millimeter, 5 millimeter?
Yeah.
Fabulous.
I don't know if it was gonna work, but I tried it and I got it. And I used 16 gauge half round.
Nice.
Wow.
Yeah, so in the half round, it doesn't take up the bulk of, it doesn't quite look as bulky. So that was a good choice.
Yeah.
You know, you could go round and finer, but I think you made a wise choice for the stability of the stone. Cool. What's it going to go on?
You know, I don't know. I was just practicing. So
Very
that's my
nice.
first.
Boy, I'd need a microscope for that.
I know it's so little. It's so little. Let me see.
yeah.
So one of the cool settings that we get to later on in, I think this chapter, maybe the very, very end of this chapter, or maybe it's in a later chapter, is making lots of tiny settings like that by chopping up chunks of tube and making them all in a chain link. So he does his tube with long strips of wire. So you're doing them all at once and you're just cutting them off like slices of bread as you go. So
Mhm.
that's a great, that's a tough one to do. The smaller they get, the harder it is. Anything
Yeah.
else?
Yeah, I have two more. I've been working on fusing, but I'm not doing that well. But I ended up making these rings.
Nice. Is that
Ooh,
from
neat.
Francesca's, what is she calling it? The bowl ring or something?
Yeah,
Nice.
but I ended up not doing it like she said. Like
Oh,
I was
okay.
having a hard time like soldering a gold ball there.
Yep.
But then I did a tube setting.
Nice.
It's a little
Those are
diamond.
fabulous.
Very
Thank
nice.
you.
Very nice.
Very cute.
So
like
they're
the
all
tube
samples
setting.
is what I've
Yeah.
been doing lately.
That's great.
And I had one last question.
Sure.
This is a little pearl.
Is it a mabe or is it just sitting in a cup?
It's sitting in a cup. I have not set it, but I did a little tube. See? And I
Okay.
did a little tube. Now I was wondering, is it safe to do this for a ring or should I stick it as a pendant?
Safe is somewhat relative, meaning, so you've got a little bit of height because you put it in a
Yeah.
dome and that
Right.
protects it. The big problem is any rings are more likely to get banged against things that can scratch the pearl. Does that mean I never put pearls in rings? Oh, hell no, because people want pearls in rings.
Okay.
But the more protection you can put around it, the better. And you know, I just tell people it's not an everyday wear, it's a special occasion wear. Just like I tell them when they're buying opals from me, is
Mhm.
opal rings are for once in a while wear, not not wear it to work, not wear it to garden. So
Mhm.
yeah, and
Okay.
you're using a tube to set it on, or you're setting it in a tube as if it were a setting wall. Both?
It's like inside the tube.
Okay, or do you have a peg as well?
Yeah,
Okay,
do
that's
have
what I really cared about, is the peg.
it's got a peg.
Got it. Good. Okay. It's hard to see in the reflections, but yeah. For me,
Yes,
the
and
big thing
then
is making sure that you are using glue when you're putting it on that peg.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
I recommend using square wire for pegs for pearls. And then you twist it so that you get more surface area to hold the glue in.
Okay.
But round will work too. Just scratch it up, like use a little pair of snips or something and put little hash marks around the prong a little bit to give
Mhm.
it more to grip onto.
Mhm,
Cool.
mhm.
Anybody else
Yeah.
have show and tell?
Thank you.
Stephanie, you're welcome to join in. You don't have to be shy just because you're new.
Nothing to show right now.
Okay. Well, again, as with other ones, I will try to get this video out in the next week or two. I have class next weekend. Probably it's gonna be 2 weeks. I have a show in a few weeks that I have to get ready for. So yeah, I'll try to get it out within a week or two. I usually start it processing. It's only if my system jams up on me that I don't get back to it until later. Our next session is 11/2. And that will be hopefully doing, oops, what are we going to do? We're going to do setting of the Marquis that we just did, and we will go back to the crown setting is my hope, before we move forward again in the chapter. So if in case you weren't here when we started chapter 4, I was not ready yet to do the crown setting. I was trying to get myself able to do one of the techniques he uses, and I just have determined my hands will not put up with the sheer force needed to bend metal this way instead of this way. So we're going to just do the other version of it, which
Mhm.
requires measurement and templating. Who knew templates were good? They're really good.
Yeah.
They're just a pain in the butt.
More
Yay.
measurements.
More measurements. Yay, my favorite. Okay, gang, have a lovely evening or whatever your
Thank you,
time zone.
Rachel.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you.
Thank
Good
you.
luck with
Bye.
the
Night all.
show.